Hey guys, it's Josh. Today we're going to be talking about the Graph API Playground. I have Michael Zagowski and Brian Anderson, Field CTO. Michael's from our product team, and we're going to walk through what the GraphQL API Playground is and how to use it. So, Brian, take it away. Walk us through what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so the Graph API Playground is a client that our customers and people can use to learn how to interact with the GraphQL API that we expose. Some of the general uses for that will be around exploring and testing, coming up with the right syntax to either pull data from our platform or either push configurations. It's useful for figuring out the syntax for constructing queries to do that. Helpful for debugging and troubleshooting, looking at why a particular piece of syntax may or may not work. And then lastly, you can save, all of your queries and history of that and be able to share that syntax with team members that are looking to put integrations in place as well.
Before we hand it to Michael to do the demo, Brian, can you kind of tee up the use case that we're talking about, like what we're doing? And because it was interesting when we were prepping for this, like it actually resonates, I think, with a lot of people. Can you just give a quick run through of that, what it is?
Absolutely. So the
Yeah.
reason that we would use the playground is to be able to kind of simulate and test some of these queries and be able to understand how to use it and what is possible. What you would do is use the playground that we're going to see in a moment to construct some of these queries and then put those into either scripts or CI/CD pipelines or different automation frameworks to be able to put that in place to orchestrate either retrieving data or pushing and pulling configurations and orchestration at scale.
Awesome. Cool. All right, Michael, I'm excited to see it. Walk us through with what you got.
Perfect. So this is an account that we are going to use today. And as you can see, it has a bunch of sites connected to the Cato backbone. And we want to see how we can use the API to fetch, read the information about the sites and also modify some of the configuration. So we are going to use the playground tool, but how do you get to this playground? So you can see that in the documentation, you have the API endpoint. And this is the endpoint that you are using to basically do the API calls. But if you will copy this URL of the endpoint and just put it in your browser, you will see that there is actually a very useful tool called the Playground. And you can use this tool to experiment with API and understand the syntax and the capabilities. So this is a very good starting point.
Yeah, the
So
Cato management application that we had there we saw on the dashboard, each one of those has a particular URL. In this case, it's api.catonetworks.com, but there's also different regions that we may have, whether it be US or Japan or other instances of the Cato management application. So depending on where your instance is hosted, you would have that kind of convention of naming convention for the URL. And you simply just drop that API endpoint that you find into a browser, and you get back to the tool that Michael shared, which is the Playground Explorer that we can use to kind of simulate some of those payloads.
exactly. So in today's example, we are using this one. It's just the EU endpoint. And if I open it in the browser, I see this beautiful tool. So the first thing that we want to do is to get some information about all the sites that we saw in the CMA and understand what is their connectivity status, etc. So we can see that there are some sections in this playground, and the first one to the left is basically where I put the queries or the mutations. Queries are basically read APIs in GraphQL. Mutations are write or delete or update APIs in GraphQL. And the first API that we are going to use is account snapshot. This is the account that we can use to fetch kind of static or current information on the account.
And really quickly to note about that as well is that the GraphQL API is an HTTP-based API. So we are going to be using this HTTP URL that you see. It's going to be the method of post. And as a part of each one of those payloads, we do have variables and headers that we'll be defining. So part of it is going to be constructing the query that we see on the left side called account snapshot. But the other aspect to it around authentication would be in the previous videos, we've covered how to generate an API key. We'd want to pass in the header for this request, which is how we perform authentication for the API. And then we're going to be covering in a moment also how to define some of the variables for each one of these queries as well.
So every request has to have the header with the API key. Is that right, Brian?
That's right. So other
Okay.
APIs work differently. Sometimes you authenticate once and get a session ID back, for example. In our case, we have a token or a key that you would give, and you define it by the header value of X-API-key. As
Hmm.
long as every request has that header in it, you could then authenticate to perform whatever operation that we have. In this case, it's the account snapshot operation that Michael's highlighting here as well.
Awesome.
And
Cool.
of course, an API key is a secret, so you should not show it to anyone. The reason I feel comfortable showing it here is that this is a temporary key that is going to expire soon, but keep it in mind, and it's your private secret. Now back to our API. So as you can see, I already have a pretty complex query, not very complex, but how did I actually get it? So actually, I started with the API documentation. So the API documentation has all the different queries and mutations and the types and all the information about the API syntax. But on top of that, it also contains examples. So actually, what I did is just copying this example, and you can see that it is also structured in the same way as a playground. So you have the query and you have the variables, and then you have an example response that you are expected to get. So I just copied this query and also the variables, and this is my account ID. You can see your account ID in the URL. Okay, so this is this number. And now if I run it, I will just get the update information about my account. Okay, so this is a very good starting point.
So that's like an immediate response to what you just did. This is the account snapshot that you just did. Like this is all information from that account.
Exactly, and we
Oh,
can
that's really cool.
actually partial information because the examples that we have in the documentation are supposed to be straightforward. So we don't put all the different options of arguments and parameters there, just a few.
Yeah. But
Understand.
it works, right? This is cool. Like you did it, it works that, and then bam, you got some data on there. So which is the beginning of exploring any API.
Exactly.
And one of the
To
biggest
start with the
differences, though,
working.
between one of the biggest differences between like a REST API, which is common in the industry, versus a GraphQL API is that the REST API, you typically submit some parameters and you usually get back a pretty well-defined response. GraphQL is a query language, so I can actually select what I want to get back. And maybe if we can go into the portion, we can explore the schema here. Right now we're selecting things like connectivity status and HA status and operational
Oh,
status.
yeah.
If you jump over to the left, I can choose and craft what my response should look like based on the information that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So let's go
Exactly.
into the
You can
Explore
see
there and
that.
see some of those fields.
Exactly. So you can see that on the left, you actually have a few kind of tools, useful tools that are also part of this playground. First of all, you have the actual documentation, so it's also accessible here directly. You can also have see the history of like previous calls that you did.
Oh,
And
that's
this is
cool.
what Brian mentioned, right? This is basically an interactive view, and it dynamically identifies actually what type of requests, queries, mutations are currently active. And it also provides all the basically capabilities, all the different parameters that I can choose. For example, in this case, right, you can also see that this is an argument, so this is something that you need to provide as an input. And the rest here are actually parameters that I can get as part of my response. And if I want, for example, to read some additional parameter, it's just a very easy kind of point and interface. I can easily add things, remove things, and experiment with what I can
So this
get.
is a good way to, as you're developing, for integrating with Cato, this is a way to be able to test out the fields that you would want to either be able to send to your, third-party tool or gather or change data. This is a way to be able to use this to be able to see what those responses are like, and it looks really easy to be able to do that.
Yeah,
That's right. So any new developer,
yeah, it's very easy. This is really the superset. You can see directly what is available, and just based on that, select the fields that you actually want to fetch. And if you will now go to kind of the next step and see, okay, let's have some little bit more advanced scenarios than just choosing additional parameters that you want to read. So let's say I want to actually filter, I want to focus on a specific site. So you can see that there is this argument here. There is a little difference between arguments and parameters in GraphQL. So arguments are part of the input actually, and I can specify specific site IDs. So again, as you can see, it's a very easy kind of flow. It was just kind of click on site IDs and say that basically tells me that I want to specify sites, and then I also say that I actually want to add a variable called site IDs, and this interface does everything for me. And now I just need to populate the site IDs. Okay, so if I go here, I have autocomplete, so it's all very nice, but now I'm kind of puzzled, right? Because, okay, what kind of site actually, how do I know what site IDs do I have? Okay, so
yeah. So this query that we have gets me back data for all of my sites, for example. And what you're describing is I want to then filter, maybe only getting data back for the site or specific sites that I'm looking for. So creating that argument that you described, there's an array or a list of values. I want to put those site IDs in there, but then the question is, where do I get my site ID from, right?
Yep.
Exactly. And there is another useful API, which is basically an API that is used to read the different objects that we have on the account. It's called entity lookup, right? So in this case, and you can see that automatically the context here had changed. So I'm now on entity lookup. And again, you can see how easy it is. For example, in this case, I wanted to just fetch site information, but it's a dropdown, so I can choose any other object. And this query just allows me to read the information that I'm interested in. And in this case, what I wanted to get is just ID and name. So this is what I chose.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you can open up a new tab to work on this, get the information, then pop it over to your other tab, right? So you can kind of start to work on this API. Like I see you're moving between tabs, and then you could grab the sites and bring it over to the main one you're working on, right?
Exactly. So I can now focus, for example, on this site specifically and just
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And then I'm just getting the information specific for the site. And of course, I can extend the different parameters that I want to read, focusing on this site.
And if you would add or change sites, you could just go right back to the other tab and grab those ones and put them right in that variable.
Exactly.
Great.
So yeah, another thing that we can do is actually change configuration, right? So up until this point, we just discussed how we can read some settings on my account. But we can have like in another example, for example, we have an object that is called a container, which is basically a group of IPs or FQDNs that can be used in different policies, okay? So this example is a little bit different in the sense that it is not basically a read API, it is a write API or an update API, and in GraphQL lingo, it's called mutation. So you can see that in the Explorer, you can choose between present mutations. And in this case, it is a mutation, but the process is exactly the same. Okay, so I just open the hierarchy and select the arguments and select, for example, in this case, whether my parameters are specified by name or by ID. In this case, I chose to use an ID because I know what is the container name, right?
So this is a container that's used in a policy you mentioned. In the Cato management application, could we take a look at where this policy in this container would be used? And so under the resources section there, we have a list of containers. And as you mentioned, there's IP or fully qualified domain. Maybe I have a list of domains that I want to block or I want to alert on or use in a rule. And maybe that is a dynamic feed that comes from some other place. And I want to push a list of domains that may change every day or every 10 minutes or whatever it is. So this is a way that you can make this list of domains dynamic coming from another system, right?
Yeah, this is leveling up automation. We talk level 1, we're reading the API. Level 2 now, in my mind, is now we're starting to say, like Brian was saying, we're extracting information from a third-party source, saying, hey, these domains, these URLs, I want blocked or I want done something with, and now we're pushing them in without any humans touching it because it's been pre-built by the API at this level.
Exactly, and this is a very kind of a common use case, right? Because we have a policy that doesn't change that much, but the actual content is very dynamic. Okay, so the actual set of QDNs, maybe you are getting it from some other system, etc.
Yep.
Or you can automate it like this, right? So in this case, okay, now I just added 2 additional domains very easily. Okay, now if you go back to the Cato management application, so just refresh here. we will see that now the container is updated, and I actually have three
Oh, that's
items and
awesome.
my
Oh, that's
new
awesome.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, that's so cool. So now when those domains pop up and the third party source, wherever you want to pull them from, you can automatically block those based on, parameters, the whatever parameters you want, and then they'll be pushed right into Cato inside of this container.
exactly,
That
exactly. And
is
of
so
course,
cool.
there are tons of things that you can do. You can actually manage the policies themselves with the API.
Yeah,
So really the possibilities are infinite.
that is great. All right, Michael, anything else? I think we've covered a lot here.
So I just encourage you to kind of start experimenting with it, open the Explorer, open the documentation, start playing with examples, all the different buttons here, and see where it can lead you and what you can get with it.
Absolutely, guys. Please explore this on your own. No pun intended. It's really powerful. You can read, you can understand what's happening in your Cato environment, and then you can also start to build out those mutations, which allow you to make configuration changes on the fly using the API. And the GraphQL Explorer allows you to do that in an environment to where you can test those variables. Anything else from you, Brian, before we close out?
I think that recaps it. Pushing important data. That's the nature of integrations there.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.